the webinar on the topic transparency in the construction sector. Well, as we move on from the 2017 to 2018, and in the past few years when this new government came in, uh, there has been a lot of development with respect to the infrastructure sector in the country. And we have also seen that India, as the day passes, is emerging as a country where more and more infrastructure investment and investment in the construction sector is going on. Uh, this is majorly due to many factors. One important factors which is influencing the construction sector or which has led to a rise in the construction sector is the push from the governmental side. Another important factor is at the international level, the need for resilient and more technologically advanced means of construction, and at the same time more advanced buildings which should be resilient, and at the same time they should be equally environmentally friendly, which is in consonance with the international SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Third important factor in India for increase in rise of the construction sector is with respect to the boom in population. Uh, as we will go through the webinar today, there are many other reasons which have led to a boom in the construction sector, and we will look into it. However, the major area of focus that we have today is how to bring in transparency, how to make the construction industry more labor friendly, how to make it more transparent, how to make it more effective, and how to make it more resilient with the global standards as India is developing. Well, the contents of this webinar, as you can see, so first of all, we will be discussing about the construction industry in general. Then we'll be talking about corruption. So corruption is another aspect in the construction industry which needs to be addressed as India moves up the ladder of development. The third important aspect is construction industry. The third content that we'll be discussing is construction industry in India per se. Okay, first we would be discussing construction industry at the global level, then at India. Then we would look into what are the problems that are there in the construction sector. Thereafter, we would look as to how we can address these problems and what steps has the government taken to address these issues. And then, as we all know, so whatever this uh, whatever the governance related projects that we are undertaking with the Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development, it is all under the Siemens Integrity Initiative. So we would be discussing about our project as well, the Siemens Integrity Initiative, and the project that we are undertaking, which is named Promotion and Adoption of Responsible Business Practices by Corporates in India. We'll also be looking into activities that we have undertaken, because we have already covered three years of the project has already been covered. I would be discussing all these later. So let us begin first of all with the construction industry. Now, when we talk about construction industry, or we talk about the infrastructure sector, the scope or the definition or the ambit of these two terms, which sometimes are used interchangeably, the scope of these two terms are very wide. So when we talk about construction does not only mean construction of buildings that we can see, or construction of roads that are generally perceived that, okay, construction is a limited field, but that is not so. Construction includes and brings within its ambit construction of roads, construction of bridges, construction of railway, any other work which is done above the ground, which can be done under the ground, or which can be taken in open excavation. That is how International Labour Organization defines it. So any kind of activity which is related to building, whether above the ground, under the ground, or in an open excavation, or any other such thing, be it related to real estate, be it related to industrial development, be it related to any other sector for that matter, or any other industry, specific industry for that matter, all of it is included within the construction industry. Construction industry also includes, so on one hand, construction industry talks about the greenfield projects, greenfield meaning thereby the new projects that are being undertaken. So new construction of new buildings, construction of new bridges, construction of new roads, etc. So this is one aspect of the construction industry. Second important aspect of construction industry which cannot be lost sight of is the construction which is required with respect to alteration, repairs, and maintenance of various kinds of structures. The construction is not limited to only greenfield projects. It can also be attributed to brownfield projects, which means, so when a bridge has been constructed, how it is to be maintained. That is another important aspect of the construction industry. Uh, all over the world, if we talk globally, all over the globe, it is one of the largest employers, and 7% of the total labor force is employed in the construction industry. Now, this statistic needs to be a little analyzed deeply. Why? Because 7% is the labor force which is formally employed. Apart from that, as we will discuss later, there are many laborers who work in the construction sector informally. So it is equally important to understand that it is not only 7% of the population or 7% of the total labor force that is employed. It is more than that, and therefore transparency in construction sector is important. How it is important with respect to the labor force, we'll also discuss this aspect. Well, the construction now, based on the types, or based on the nature based on the nature of the kind of activities which can be included in the construction industry. So they can be, number one, related to civil works, that is construction with respect to urban infrastructure, projects associated with energy, for example, establishing a solar power plant, space research, construction related to space research, armaments industry, new building materials, and retrofitting, maintenance, and upgrading of infrastructure that is already existent. Second aspect, now these are the general kind of construction activities which are undertaken in a developed country. On the other hand, developing countries have a different nature of construction. Why? Because the developed countries already have the basic minimum construction or infrastructure facilities that they need. The developing countries have to first establish the minimum basic infrastructure, thereafter, or the minimum basic developmental construction, and then they have to go on to the next level. So when it comes to developing countries, as we have, as India is a developing country, so one of the major aspects is civil works. Another important aspect is developmental infrastructure. Now, development infrastructure projects include all the infrastructure projects that is required to maintain the overall mechanism or overall economy of the country. For example, roads, dams, housing. These are the fundamental developmental infrastructure that is important. Now, as far as the construction industry is concerned, there is a general perception that only few or some of the aspects of the market forces or market economies are integrated in the construction industry. However, it is important to understand that government is both the largest consumer and the largest producer of opportunities for construction industry. So this is about the construction. Now, construction industry all over the globe, this is the case, that it is the government of the countries, they float out projects which are very important. They float out projects which are related to construction industry. They undertake activities such as development of mines, development of dams, development of railways, development of bridges, development of new buildings, etc. So all these are related to construction industry. Now, let us see as to what the statistics say when it comes to corruption in the sector. Now, the first and the foremost thing is, so there was a survey conducted way back in the year 2014 by PwC. So in that survey, the major area, or the so-called survey subject was related to construction industry, and it was surveyed that more than half of the respondents, approximately 180 companies were surveyed, and more than half of the survey respondents mentioned that there was rampant corruption. Now, because construction sector is related to activities in which assets are created, therefore, the respondents also mentioned that most of the construction sector corruption was related to asset misappropriation. Asset misappropriation here means that, number one, asset in the name of a person who is not actually the owner of the asset, and number two, with respect to cash-based transactions. So there are two kinds of construction industry corruption. So these are not the only two kind of corruption, but they are one among the many kinds of construction corruption that are there existent. So asset misappropriation was recorded as at the highest level. Then it was also identified from the survey that the construction sector has the highest rate of bribery. That means the projects which are floated by the government on one hand, and those who are involved in the construction sector actually, which means those who are involved in building or undertaking such construction activities, they pay a lot of bribe in order to secure the construction tenders on one hand, and at the same time there is also a lot of bribery with respect to approvals. Another aspect which was important was at whistleblowing, which is considered one of the essential aspect of good governance with respect to the construction industry or the construction sector. There, whistleblowing is at the minimum. That means corporate controls or good governance mechanism which are otherwise applicable or which can be otherwise easily made applicable on industries such as a company, within a company, outside a company, or with respect to stock market regulations or any other such aspect of good governance which can be made applicable to any corporate house. Those systems are not generally favorable or not effective with respect to construction sector. And another last one is that it is always with respect to the construction industry or the construction sector, it is always that the senior managerial functionalities or those in the higher echelons of management, generally it was found, or it was on the basis of the survey, it was concluded that they were those involved in maximum crimes. So this is how the corruption is there, or corruption is prevalent all over the globe in the construction industry. Now, we have already looked into as to what is the role of construction overall in the economy of the globe. Number one, we are also looking into corruption in the construction industry. Now, from here, we will move on to construction industry in India. So, as we started in the very initial, as we had begun this webinar, I had mentioned that India is a rapidly developing economy, number one, and there are many infrastructural and construction-based developments which are going on in India. Now, if we go by the statistics as presented by the government itself, construction sector or construction industry in itself is one of the largest growing or the most rapidly growing sector, and it contributes to 8% of the India's GDP alone. It is the second largest employer in the country. Now, the first employer, as we all know, is agriculture. Is the second largest employer in the country. Now, the fundamental aspect which here needs a division is that when it comes to construction industry, 50% of the construction related work that comes or that is undertaken in India is in respect of infrastructure. Rest of the construction demand comes from industrial sector and the real estate sector. That means infrastructure, when we talk about infrastructure here includes all the activities which are undertaken for improving the transport, connectivity, and telecommunication based infrastructure. And there are other aspects to it as well. For example, energy related infrastructure with respect to educational institutions, social infrastructure with respect to institutionalizing other governance mechanisms. So when it comes to construction sector, it may be generally divided as 50% of demand coming from the infrastructure, that includes the government. Rest of the construction demand comes from industrial and the real estate sector. Now, why is construction industry, or why is there a need for construction industry, and why is there, more importantly, a need to bring transparency in the construction industry? Now, if we look into the policy that is being adopted today in the country, 100% FDI has been allowed in the construction sector. With moreover, with respect to infrastructure projects, where we talk about railways, we talk about defense, we talk about oil and gas, we talk about building of dams and bridges, almost all the sectors, we talk about highways as well. All these sectors, all these infrastructure related projects have been open for 100% foreign direct investment. Now, once the market is so open to accept investments from foreign countries or other parts of the world, the market becomes more susceptible to corruption. Now, in order to curb this, we need there is a need that there should be transparency in the construction sector. At the same time, the government has launched many a plethora of schemes. So one of the most important schemes that government has launched is smart cities, as we all know. And we all know that various countries are adopting various cities in India in order to develop those cities as smart cities. So once countries outside India are adopting countries inside India, it means there would be foreign direct investment. Now, those investments need to be secured. Securing those investments is only possible by way of bringing in transparency. And moreover, we have the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, which is generally referred to as Amrit. Now, that is a mission which is based on rejuvenation of the country of the cities of the country as a whole, by incorporating various aspects of smart cities and transport, easing the transport system. We have the National Smart Grid, we have the Bharat Mala project, we have the Sagar Mala project, and we have also, the government has undertaken to renovate all the railway stations. The government has undertaken also to develop the airports. So there are a lot of construction and infrastructure related developments which are going on in the country. Now, if India wants to develop at the same pace or at a higher pace than what it is developing at the moment, it is important that there should be transparency, because for any investor who is outside the country, it is not only important that there should be an opportunity for investment, it is equally important that there should be safe opportunity, that the investor should see that there is a return to what that investor is investing into. Now, that return of investment cannot be shown upfront. It can only be shown on the basis of the kind of governance system that is there in the country. So therefore, this is the general idea about the construction industry in India. Now we'll come into the most important aspect, why we are talking about transparency in the construction sector today. So as we all know, and most of us have also faced a lot of difficulties in some of the projects that we have undertaken as a consumer, as a general consumer. And in the past few years, we have also seen a lot of cases which has come up, especially with respect to the real estate sector, wherein there is a delivery delay, or the kind of material that is used by the builder, it is not good. We have also seen cases where infrastructure related defaults on part of governmental agencies has led to deaths. So that is also one of the aspects. And uh, but it's pretty much evident, the kind of quality that is sometimes used, that is not so good, the quality of product that is so there are many technical issues which are involved. And to a large extent, these technical issues are not independent, they are also interrelated. Now, if we look into this, there was way back in the year 2002, the Chief Vigilance Commission of India. Now, the Chief Vigilance Commission of India, uh, it is the it is the apex authority which looks into the vigilance department can also be regarded as the audit eye, or a department which looks into integrity and ethics of the public sector undertakings mostly. So way back in the year 2002, they had published a report in which it was categorically mentioned. I would read verbatim: quality in the construction sector was the area exploited initially for getting bribes from the contractors by allowing inferior quality of works. The payment to the contractors became the next area. Most of the activities in the construction had now become problem areas of corruption. The following areas are identified: administrative approval, detailed estimate and technical sanction, consultancy, preparation of tender documents, invitation and opening of tenders, tender security, tender scrutiny and award of works, works agreement, payment to contractors, site records, quality in construction. Now we'll look into all these aspects one by one. So the one thing that CVC mentioned, or CVC tried to identify way back in the year 2002, was there was a lot of bribe that was going on. So the first thing that comes into picture is administrative approval. As we all know, whenever construction industry or the construction sector work is to be undertaken, or an infrastructure work is to be undertaken, there is a lot of administrative approvals, as we'll see later, that whenever construction sector, construction site or construction work is going on, there are a lot of laws which regulate them. Now, a lot of laws means a lot of administrative approvals, and where there comes chance of administrative approvals or discretionary powers, it obviously might lead to chances of leakages and bribes. So that is one aspect. Detailed estimate and technical sanction. Now, detailed estimate and technical sanctions here mean the detailed estimate with respect to the project costs, and technical sanctions means the engineers who are involved in providing sanction to various technical aspects related to that project. That was another area, because the technical sanction has to be given by a certain specified person. Therefore, that person has ample discretion, and there might be chances of leakages or bribes being given. Consultancy in this respect means that some of the consultants were given the project without qualifying as well. They were given the projects only on the basis of the fact that they might have connections. Number two, that they are best able to cook the books. So that is another gray area. Preparation of tender documents. Now, as we all know that with respect to procurement these days, though, as we'll see later in this presentation, in this webinar, that the procurement system from 2002 to 2000 in the past 15 years has come a long way. So procurement is generally not a major issue these days, but still it's one of the issues. And then another important aspect was the payment to contractors. Now, payment to contractors, as we all know, when it comes to governmental payments, it is generally delayed due to various factors, which the government tries to show that there are many different factors to it. Payment to contractors was one aspect. Site records and quality in construction. We all know the quality in construction is deteriorating, and it is not always deteriorating, but at the same time, we find that it is one of the problems which is identified by the CVC. These are some of the problems and some of the leakages that allow a lot of means for impeding governance in the construction industry in India. Now, so as I was talking in the previous slide about problems, so another area which needs attention is, this is what we were talking about. So when it comes to the construction industry, and in the next slide it comes to the infrastructure industry, you will see there are many laws. See, there are here the RERA has come into picture now. The Minimum Wages Act, Employees Compensation Act, the Payment of Wages Act, contract labor, water, national environmental laws, contract laws, land acquisition, maternity benefit, payment of gratuity, building and other construction workers, regulation of employment and conditions of service act 1996, the Employee State Insurance, Legal Metrology Act. So these are some of the acts and laws which are applicable in the construction sector in India. Apart from this, we also have many other regulations. For example, Benami transactions. These laws basically indirectly deal with the construction industry, and at the same time they also indirectly deal with the infrastructure investment aspect. So Benami Transactions Act, Competition Act, FEMA, Foreign Trade Act, Indian Contract Act, once again, Real Estate Regulation Act, specific taxation laws, GST has come into picture, SEBI regulations, RBI regulations, regulations issued by the tax authorities. Then there are different policies which are applicable on the infrastructure sector. So those were some of the other umpteen laws which are applicable. Now, so many laws allow for leakages. So that is one problem which needs to be tackled. Now, apart from the problems that we have already stated, apart from those were the problems which were identified by the Central Vigilance Commission generally. Now we'll look into other problems based on statistics and reports. Now, the first and the foremost problem is the petty and systemic corruption. Now, these are the two kinds of corruption that they generally say is existent in India. So these are the two fundamental issues associated with the construction industry. Second important aspect is PPP structure of undertaking infrastructure project. Now, if we look into the CAG report, it has again and again tried to identify and has mentioned that the PPP structure of undertaking infrastructure projects is not the best model, and that government should look into other options which are there. Though the report clearly identifies that PPP structure has failed the infrastructure projects in the country. This is what the CAG report of 2016 and 2014 mentioned. Now, another important aspect which is important is lack of due diligence before undertaking infrastructure projects. Now, this is more so with the case of dams. There is the recent statistics, if we go through them, we will find that most of the mega dams which were constructed with crores of public investment, now they are of no use. No use only because of the fact that the due diligence aspect of the viability of such infrastructure projects was not undertaken for a long-term basis. Another important aspect is delays in the delivery of the project, leading to cost escalation. So what happens is, we all know that inflation is something which raises and the value of money lowers. So what happens is, even though there is a time bound approval, everything is done, if the project is not undertaken within the stipulated time as was given in the project document initially, it leads to escalation with respect to the cost of the project. Why? Because say suppose a project was to end in 2015, however it is going to end in 2020, the product which was being bought at X price in 2015 will not remain the same in 2020. Therefore, delay with respect to the project leads to cost escalation, which is a major gray area which needs to be addressed. Then obviously there is lack of effectiveness of anti-corruption institutions. This is one of the factors which is plagued, and it has been pointed out time and again by CAG. It has also been pointed out the World Bank. We'll see later on that World Bank has also pointed out some of the important gray areas which need to be understood. Though the next gray area was irregular tax framework and diversion of funds. So state had different laws of taxation, and then similarly the center had different taxation framework. So the two, even though regulated by the same act, the tax framework of the states was different. So there was a possibility of diversion of funds, though this has also been largely addressed after coming of the GST. And at the same time, sometimes what happens, so this is specifically, there was a case, the Hyderabad Metro case, in which there was a long term delay in the project because of a political crisis. Now, obviously, any government that comes into picture would, or any two governments will not have the same agenda and same priorities. However, this political crisis has a direct impact on the projects which are being undertaken, infrastructure projects. This was evident in the Hyderabad Metro case because uh, it uh, it was delayed for it was delayed approximately how many it was delayed by approximately 15 years because of the limbo. And actually the project went on after its initially it was um, after the initial conceiving of the Hyderabad Metro project, it took a whole lot of 56 years for the metro to complete. And this was majorly because of not because of any other reason, but because of political crisis. And every time a new government came, it was not interested in taking. That's a completely different aspect. But however, political crisis also has a direct impact on the construction industry. Now, this is with respect to the infrastructure, as we have already discussed. So construction sector can be related to infrastructure projects, and they can also be related to real estate development. So the construction sector with respect to infrastructure projects has different problem. With respect to real estate projects that are being taken and construction which is being undertaken for development of real estate, it has different problems. The first and the foremost problem with respect to real estate projects and the construction industry are delay in project delivery. We all are aware, and we thankfully the Real Estate Regulation Development and Regulation Act has come into picture. So it's a big relief to a lot of consumers, and we'll also discuss about RERA later. But delay in the delivery of project is one aspect which needs to be dealt with. Second is there is another issue related to quality of materials used in real estate projects. Many a times the builders use low quality products just to save money and increase their profit. This is another area which needs to be tackled. Diversion of funds. So we all know there are many cases wherein the consumer or the buyer had invested certain sum of money and given it to the given it to the builder, but the builder did not use that money for construction of buildings. Rather, that money was used for some other purpose. Land acquisition in umpteen laws, as we have already seen, there are almost above 20 laws, 20 statutes for that matter, which are applicable to a real estate construction project. So, umpteen, a lot of laws is also an impediment. Then another important issue which needs to be addressed is the informality of the sector. So informality in the sense, informality with respect to labor and predominance of small firms. So there are not large there though there are certain large real estate developers, but mostly we have small scale firms in the country. And then because India is a country which suffers from another aspect of problem, that is related to lack of education and literacy. So lack of awareness among the labor about the laws that are applicable on their own uh, rights and benefiting the labors of the country. That is another aspect. Labor exploitation in the hands of employers and lack of regulatory oversight. There is again, this problem is somewhat associated with the earlier problem of lack of effectiveness of anti-corruption institutions. So lack of regulatory oversight and application of local and municipal laws. At the same time, exposure to hazardous working conditions. So, in a nutshell, if we want to say, there are some problems which are independent. For example, delay in project delivery. There's some problems which are associated. For example, labor exploitation, lack of regulatory oversight. So, if there is a lack of regulatory oversight, if an agency which is there for regulating labor health, which is there for regulating labor standards, if it does its work and if all the laborers are provided with the necessary health and safety measures, and at the same time the laborers are also provided with the necessary uh, contributions and payments and wages, so obviously the other problem of labor exploitation will subside. But these are interrelated aspects. At the same time, Another interrelated aspect is lack of awareness. So because there is lack of awareness, they can be exploited. They can be exposed to hazardous working conditions. The employers or the builders or whoever is regulating or whoever is undertaking this construction project knows that there is nobody to care, or they know that these laborers are not aware enough to understand the kind of benefits and rights they already have, and therefore they can be exploited. So some of the aspects can be considered as completely independent, and some of the aspects are intricately woven. Now all these aspects lead to various issues with respect to construction sector in the real estate projects, and therefore it is important that all these issues, if we need to develop, if India needs to develop at a higher pedestal and at a higher rate, uh, it is important that it takes steps in order to deal with all the existing issues. So let us take a break for 5 minutes here, and then we will understand the next slide as to what are the other problems, and we'll also study as to what are the various aspects of construction industry which have already been dealt by the government. We'll also look into the World Bank's aspect, and later on we'll discuss about our projects. Let's take a 5 minutes break here. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So, we were talking about the problems. So, we have already seen that there are different kinds of issues which are associated with the construction of infrastructure sector, and we have also seen that there are different kind of issues which are related to problems with the construction sector in real estate projects. Now we look generally, again, these problems are also associated with what the problems are, and these are some of the general problems that come into play whenever a construction project or construction sector work is going on. Again, with respect to land acquisition, compensation against land acquisition, that is another major area which needs to be addressed, because sometimes even though com- uh, uh, compensations can be granted against land acquisition, but compensation in the name of acquiring land which is valuable to the person concerned or the owner of the land cannot be considered good. This has been to the extent that the Supreme Court has also mentioned that compensation against land or money for acquiring land, and that to cultivable land, that's one of the aspects. So compensation against land which is generally fertile cannot be considered as good. Then there are environmental issues associated with construction projects, human rights issues, issues with respect to health, labor safety, exploitation of labors, difference in payment of wages. So these are another issues related to social security. Now that is one gray area, though the government is trying to address that area uh, at a very fast rate, but that is another area which has remained gray for a long time. And at the same time, another issue is related to uh, payment of wages. So payment of wages also need to be considered. So these are some of the issues, some of the general issues apart from the already existent issues. So now, now that we have identified what are the problems, we would look into addressing how we can address these problems. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, World Bank in the year 2008 had released a report after studying the India infrastructure with respect to the construction of roads, and some of the major recommendations which World Bank came up with was that India needs to strengthen its tax regime. India needs to issue regulatory policy for the road sector. At the same time, it was also recommended by the World Bank that there is a need to improve the human resource skill of the laborers, to improve transparency in the bidding procedure, to review effectiveness of subsidies, fiscal concessions, and taxation, facilitate access to credit or finance. Now, this was in the year 2008, almost 10 years are about to pass. Now, all these recommendations have been, and some other recommendations were also there, but these important recommendations have, to a large extent, we can say that in India these have been addressed. And though all the developments are a recent development, the actual impact or effect of these developments cannot be yet gauged. It will take a little more, say suppose another 5 years, half a decade, to gauge the effectiveness of all the measures that have been taken by the government. Now, as far as the steps taken by the government in this regard are increasing transparency, number one, GST. Now, GST, as we all know, when VAT was introduced, value added tax, it was said that it would be a game changer. We all know what happened after that. It is history. Now, GST has also been introduced with a benign motive, with a good intention. Now, what its impact would be on transparency, that is yet to be gauged. Second important thing is there are a lot of changes are being introduced in the labor sector and labor laws at the same time, and the government is coming with a lot of schemes just to provide social security to those laborers who are in the unorganized sector. So this is scheme by the government, the Atal Pension Yojana, in which all the working all the working class between the age of 18 to 60 years have been 18 to 40 years, sorry, 18 to 40 years have been included for a minimum payment against which they would be paid pension after the after the age of 60 years. uh, Skill development, as we all know, there are two major developments that are going on right now which are yet to take place. Though we all know that skill development ministry has been already established, the government is also intending and trying to introduce, it is going to introduce uh, a full-fledged workforce in the nature or equivalent to the rank of Indian Administrative Officers, IAS. It will also, the government is planning to introduce a full-fledged workforce, officer force, equivalent to the cadre of IAS, that would be looking into skill development. That means Indian Skill Development Service. That is what the government is proposing. The procurement, as we all know, most of the procurement and tendering aspect has been widely made transparent by the use of electronic portals and other aspects of good governance, electronic portals, and also they're using the mobile applications. Now, again, with respect to, so one of the recommendations was review the effectiveness of subsidies. So with respect to effectiveness of subsidies, direct benefit transfer schemes have been introduced for securing the laborers. At the same time, there are many applications. And another important aspect which the government is trying to address, or which the government is again and again trying to um, bring reform to, is by introduction of certain mechanism that will give the real-time information. So what was happening earlier, it was something like anybody could make a photograph, photoshop a photograph, and just present it to the government to get the loans sanctioned. But these days the government has introduced portals and applications which give real-time information. That means moreover, this is also being connected with the GPS. Now, the two-way connection, that means real-time information and the GPS, the two connections are being used to give the actual data about the developmental aspect of the project that is going on. And we also have, in order to facilitate, so one of the recommendations was to facilitate or facilitate access to credit or finance. So in the year 2014, Real Estate Investment Trust was established, and in year 2016 real estate infrastructure investment trusts have been established. Now, these trusts are mechanisms to raise money. They're similar to stock markets. What they do is that anybody who wants to invest in these trusts, they can easily invest. From these trusts, the money would be taken out, and this infrastructure project or the real estate project would be developed. Once it is developed, thereafter, the returns or the gains which are made out of such projects, or the person would get a return, the person who is investing in these trusts would get a return. So these are some of the steps which the government has taken, and it is very important that infrastructure transparency be introduced in the country. After this, as we were discussing earlier about Real Estate Regulation and Development Act of 2016, this is an important development because it regulates the real estate sector in not one way, but in a lot of ways. So here we would be discussing some of the salient features which the Act has. So to begin with, the objectives of the statute. So the fundamental objective of RERA, as it is generally referred to as, so the fundamental objectives of of RERA are to regulate and promote real estate sector, to ensure real estate sale in transparent and efficient manner, to protect consumer interests, and to establish adjudicating mechanism for speedy dispute redressal. So in a way, the act has been devised to encompass all the aspects of real estate, beginning with regulating the real estate sector and promoting it as well, So regulating here means regulating the builders. Promoting here means allowing that real estate developments take place in the country. This act is not at all intended at impeding real estate development. It rather promotes real estate development. Another important aspect is to ensure real estate sale in transparent and efficient manner. So this is one of the major concerns that has been predominantly reiterated by many organizations and many officials, that there is no transparency and there is a need for transparency. So just to ensure real estate sale in transparent and efficient manner, RERA has been introduced. Another important aspect is protecting the consumer interest and at the same time adjudicating mechanism for speedy dispute redressal. So as we all know that in the country there are many cases which have already piled up. In order to deal with the piling up of cases and at the same time speeding up the dispute redressal with respect to real estate, not the piling up of cases in general, but piling up of cases with respect to the real estate sector and speeding the dispute redressal mechanism with respect to real estate sector, the adjudicating mechanism has also been established. Now, some of the other important aspects are a real estate regulatory authority at the state level has to be introduced, has to be made by each state. At the same time, 70% of the money that is being collected by the builder, uh, that is collected by the builder after accepting money from the public at large, 70% of that money is to be invested in a separate escrow amount, and from there the funds would be allocated or the funds would be taken out as and when it is necessary for construction purposes. Now, uh, if we have a close look at the radar, we'll identify that it has become more and more consumer centric. Consumer centric in the sense that it tries to protect the interests of the consumer. It tries to protect the value of money that has been invested by the consumer. At the same time, it tries to give a lot of leverage and privilege to the consumer himself with respect to a project. So the first of these being, so if the person or the, say suppose there is a builder who has collected money, if he does not make or if he does not deliver the project in time, the builder is held liable for payment of interest against the amount that has been paid by him. At the same time, any change in the agreed plan, so there is an agreement, as we all know, if there is any change in the agreed plan or there is any change that the builder wants to introduce, it would be only on the consent of the consumer, not otherwise. At the same time, each phase of the project is considered standalone. It's not that the entire project is considered as one and the same. Each phase of the project is considered as different, and for each phase there is a registration required, though this is a cumbersome process for the builder himself. But at the same time, as I had already mentioned, that this has become a more consumer centric approach. At the same time, there is also a with such liabilities, there is also a responsibility upon the RERA authorities that builder registration and real estate registration and approvals with respect to construction, all these approvals should be given in time. And overall, if we look at the structure and framework of RERA, it appears that it is a very important piece of legislation which can be a game changer in times to come, only if it is implemented in the most effective manner, at the same time with all the benign motive that is in there in the act. Now we have addressed as to the problems of the construction industry. Addressing these problems, the steps taken by the government, the RERA, will shift on to another aspect of the webinar now, that is related to our project. So the project that we are undertaking is called the Siemens Integrity Initiative. Now, in 2009, let's take a look back. So, in 2009, what happened was there was a big scandal which came into uh, light with respect to Siemens, and thereafter the proceedings went on, and there was an agreement reached between Siemens and the World Bank. The two parties agreed that they would be Siemens was given two options, either to exit the market, or Siemens was asked to support initiatives that have a positive impact on the business. Siemens chose the second, and thereafter the integrity initiative was initiated. This has been in run since then, and Siemens funds many different projects throughout the globe uh, with respect to good governance, ethics, and promoting business responsibility. So under the project, in the past 3 years now, we are in the fourth year of the project. Under the project, we have undertaken various activities. We have undertaken roadshows in various parts of the country. We have undertaken a roadshow in Bhopal, roadshow in Bhubaneswar, Bangalore, Jaipur, and New Delhi, Chandigarh, and at other places, Chennai, Coimbatore. So we have conducted various roadshows, and we have also conducted awareness conferences. Now, these awareness conferences, we conduct one annual awareness conference, and then we have also conducted other awareness conference throughout the country in different parts. Mostly the awareness conference, our annual awareness conference is linked with the sustainability summit that CESG organizes. At the same time, we had also conducted um, awareness conference at Lucknow, Ujjain, and three awareness conferences were organized in collaboration with educational institutes. One was the Lucknow, I am Lucknow, and another was with Vikram University, Ujjain. We have also conducted one event with Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. We have conducted training programs at Food Corporation of India, at Concor, and we have also conducted training program with International Anti-Corruption Academy, and we have also conducted an international conference. We have also collaborated with National University Delhi. So these are the various activities that we have undertaken in the past 2 years. Now, for the past since May, so in the month of May, there was a training program which was conducted on the topic of ISO 31000 and ISO 37001, and there was a workshop on integrity and governance in procurement, which is conducted in collaboration with the World Bank New Delhi office. Now, in July, we launched. So we have also prepared our e-modules. Now, e-modules are have been prepared on 5 subjects. The 5 subjects being anti-corruption mechanism, code of conduct, whistleblowers policy. Then we have public procurement, and another is with respect to the Companies Act. So these are the 5 aspects: anti-corruption mechanism, code of conduct, Companies Act, whistleblowers policy, and public procurement. So these are the 5 aspects on which we have prepared e-modules. Now these e-modules are available on our website free of cost to disseminate information about how the laws can be used by people for better informing the citizen, and at the same time how these laws are helpful in good governance. We have also conducted a knowledge cafe session with the Dignity India on role of consumers in promotion of business ethics, and we also conducted another training program for SMEs at in collaboration with our Noida chapter on 25th August. And we also signed a memorandum of agreement, a memorandum of understanding between with MDI for conducting a certificate course. In September, our second annual awareness conference was organized, in which we had discussed some of the discussion points, some of the important discussion points which emerged was with respect to collective action, that strengthening of public institutions, the role of civil society, internal monitoring mechanisms being developed, the exemplary individual conduct is essential, and developing ethical culture and abiding by it is an ongoing process for an organization. So these are some of the activities. In the month of October, we had conducted a training program, which was for the public sector undertakings. Almost 10 public sector undertakings participated, and we had the trainers from World Bank. We had trainer from the Department of Telecommunication. We also had representatives from Siemens. We had former former officials from the government and public departments. So there was a 3-day certificate program which was conducted. Then we also had conducted another webinar on the topic India Supply Chain Transparency Initiative, and that is another initiative that is being undertaken by us. Now, in the future, we have planned some of the activities that will be undertaking as in time comes. Focus group discussion in the western region, that means Gujarat or Maharashtra, and another training program with IACA in February 2018. Policy dialogue session, we are planning to conduct policy dialogue sessions and collaboration with SME associations and publication of research papers and articles for dissemination of information. So these are some of the activities that we are undertaking. Now, coming back to where we had started this webinar, that is transparency and governance in construction sector in India. So number one, we discussed about the construction sector globally. Then we discussed about the construction sector generally in India and the problems with construction sector. What are the major problems and how construction sector influences infrastructure projects and real estate projects, and how can these problems be solved, and how is India, how the government of the country is actually trying to solve these issues. These are the various aspects that we have discussed. Now, Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development is already working on various aspects of sustainable development. At the same time, the construction sector projects which are being undertaken cannot be completely set aside from the aspect of sustainable development. It is as interrelated with sustainable development as any other sector. Therefore, there is a need to collaborate with the construction agencies, governmental agencies, and other players and stakeholders who are there in this sector with the already existing framework. Only then good governance and more investment in this sector can be introduced in the country. And with this, we come to the end of the seminar. If there is any other question that you have, you may write to us at ashutosh.mishra, ashutosh.mishra @cii.in, ashutosh.mishra@cii.in, and you can connect to us and we will be more than happy to answer all your queries. Thank you. Thanks all the participants for attending, and thank you everyone.